Visitors to the National Museum of Ireland might recognise the Geashill Cauldron or brewing pan from the medieval Ireland display of food vessels on the mezzanine floor of the Kildare Street Museum. It has been on permanent display in the museum since 1955 and has an interesting tale to tell. The cauldron was discovered during drainage works on Lord Digby's estate in Geashill, County Offaly in 1859. Thereafter it was kept in Geashill Castle, the land agent's residence in Geashill. Between 1872 and 1922, Reginald Digby was the land agent, and he was Lord Digby's nephew. He and his family referred to the cauldron as their old bath. Some preliminary research had been carried out in the early 20th century, which suggested that the brewing pan had been mentioned in the Annals of the Four Masters in a description of a defeat of the English of Meath in Upper Geashill. Some years later, during the troubled times of the War of Independence, Reginald Digby and his family decided to return to England, and an auction of the contents of the castle was advertised. The cauldron, meanwhile, was boxed up by order of Lord Digby, who had decided to gift it to the National Museum in Dublin. However, word got to 4 local IRA men that the cauldron was destined for London, and fearing that it would be lost to the nation, they raided the castle and took the cauldron into hiding. Geashill Castle was burnt some months later in the Civil War. The cauldron was not seen again in public for 30 years, despite intense behind-the-scenes investigations and negotiations from senior management of the National Museum to the top brass of the IRA. All the while, the cauldron was kept in hiding on a farm in Killellery in Geashill. In 1953, Father Joe Hurley, the noted Jesuit scholar who was based at Tullabeg College in Rahan, organised an exhibition of local archaeology and history in the vocational school in Tullamore. This was part of a national celebration of cultural activity called An Tóstal. He discovered the cauldron's whereabouts and persuaded the 4 men to allow it to be displayed in Tullamore and then for it to be transferred to the National Museum. People who remember seeing the cauldron on display in Tullamore in 1953 have described it as being like seeing the 7th wonder of the world. It was the first time Offaly had such a prominent public exhibition of local history and archaeology. The cauldron was duly removed to the museum following the exhibition, and the 4 men were lauded in the local press for keeping it safe for the nation. In fact, Lord Digby had legally made over the cauldron to the museum in 1932. Following restoration and cleaning by museum conservators and further negotiations about compensation for the 4 men for looking after the cauldron, it was officially registered in 1955 and has been on display in the central court of the museum ever since. There are numerous archival records that have been brought together like a jigsaw puzzle to complete the story of the cauldron. These range from various papers in Offaly archives, some collections in UCD archives, and an important file in the National Museum of Ireland. Without these records, the twists and turns of the cauldron's journey from the bogs of Offaly to the museum's central court would be lost to time. The whole story and the political machinations behind the scenes will feature in an in-depth article in Volume 11 of the journal Offaly Heritage, which will be published in autumn 2020. I hope you enjoyed this brief overview, and next time you are in the museum, take a closer look at the old bath sitting silently in its display panel and think of all the tales it could tell.